you have to be very pragmatic past a certain scale, right? Like taking 10% of Instagram's user base tomorrow and activity and putting them on any L1, L2, potentially L3 is not going to go well.
Truly appreciate kind of the ruthless pragmatism.
Whether it's different L1s, taking different approaches like Aptos and SWE, whether it's improving the existing L1s, what we've seen with like dank sharding and other directions. L2s, of course. Now there's even L3s. So we expect and are excited for all the activity happening in the space. And at Bastion, we're not taking a side on one direction or area being more promising than another. Really, our goal is how do we make for product builders and the users of those products today have the experiences be snappy as if they were still on a TikTok or a Netflix or a Web2 app.
Riyaz and Nas, thank you so much for joining me, the founders of Bastion. Formerly, you guys were both at A16z and have recently spun out and started to do your own company. So really looking forward to diving into the decision to leave A16z, ultimately build your own company. And ultimately, I think the true vision that we really all align with is kind of growing the pie for what Web3 can become. And I think originally when I got involved in crypto in like the 2017 timeframe, I was really excited by kind of the promise of kind of permissionless, decentralized nature at scale. And I think you guys very much align with that. So really looking forward to the conversation and thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. Very excited for this conversation. And yeah, it's always great to have like-minded people taking, about an hour of time to chop it up.
Perfect. Well, perhaps I know this is one of your earlier podcasts, perhaps just for the audience, can you each just do a quick introduction on yourself and ultimately how you kind of got in the crypto world?
Yeah, that sounds great. So actually, Riyaz and I have a lot of copy-paste experience. So we've actually been working together for close to 8 years across, now 5 different companies, and some of them outside of the Web3 space, and then kind of like joined the movement and really on the infrastructure side. But yeah, we kind of like started working together outside actually of the Web3 space at Docker. So developer tooling massively used essentially across workloads and kind of like developer kind of tooling environments. Riyaz and I were both part of the security team there, building essentially features that hopefully would help all of the developers in the world build more securely and deploy and run their code more securely in the world. And so very interesting essentially to see a world where security needs to disappear, to kind of like let the developer experience kind of on the journey, and then move to basically the director of security and the security lead at Docker actually went on to create a company called Anchorage. So Riyaz joined as founding engineer. I joined shortly after. Together, kind of like help participate to the 0 to 1 effort of building kind of institutional infrastructure. And really focusing on the institutions that until then didn't have really a safe space to kind of custody assets and trade and participate. So kind of went on to Libra and Facebook and then really built large scale infrastructure there. And at some point, it was pretty clear that, despite our efforts to build large scale wallet infrastructure, we would not be able to launch. So moved on to A16z and really were super thankful and grateful to the team to really let us join the journey there as CTO and CISO, really building internal infrastructure and also really focus on helping the entire portfolio of companies that Andreessen Horowitz invests in. So Riyaz, feel free to take on.
Yeah, lots of copy paste. I mean, we've been working together for almost a decade. It's been really interesting to see the common thread between all these experiences at Docker, obviously security, but a product where usability, especially for the developers, that's what made Docker so addictive and so amazing for developers to use and build on. So security couldn't get in the way of the user experience. That we'll talk about Bastion, but a lot of our inspiration there really, I think the way we think about security is not getting in the way of the user experience and just in building products, or whether it's infrastructure or products in general. Of course, the institutional side with Anchorage, the consumer side, and that scale with Facebook, and then everything in between and more with Andreessen Horowitz, the amazing portfolio, all the amazing founders in the space and teams building across, infrastructure, product, and even partners of the portfolio. And Nassim and I always knew we wanted to do something, work together. We've been doing it for a while, and it's been working well. And it was very clear that as we were at Andreessen Horowitz, that there was this gap in the market that we felt uniquely qualified and just compelled to help build. And that's really the origin story of Bastion.
Yeah. It's actually very interesting because we kind of saw the 10 transactions a day of $100 million and then building infrastructure for 100 million transactions a day of $10. And so just very different kind of security models and compliance and, taking 10% of Instagram's user base tomorrow and activity and putting them on any L1, L2, potentially L3 is not going to go well. And so there was a lot of pragmatism that needed to be built down to the core of, such an infrastructure, especially for a user base that just doesn't want to know what blockchain is, right? Just like they don't want to learn what SMTP and other low-level technologies are. So that was essentially the idea behind it and kind of the genesis. And yeah, very excited to start essentially the journey of bringing kind of Web3 experiences to Web3.
Yeah, no, I think to your point, Web3 is still relatively small. And I think when I kind of dove in and started peeling behind the curtain, especially kind of looking at doing analytics, some of the more popular applications, the daily active addresses in these things is still, compared to Web 2, is a fraction of a percent. And so I really do appreciate kind of empowering the individuals with all the properties that Web 3 we know and love, but at scale. And so I would love to dive into Bastion and really, even more of the impetus of what problems you really saw, either from the engineering point of view, on the technical architecture, from the usability, from kind of the people that will ultimately interact with these applications, or even kind of on the organizational side, some of the friction points there that further prevented them from even experimenting Web3. Can you dive a little bit more into the clarity of why now and why Bastion?
Yep, definitely. And it was really interesting for us because we had the first draft idea of Bastion essentially when we were both at Facebook, or now Meta, working on bringing DM, used to be called Libra, to life, in putting it in the hands of billions of users. And of course, there was a brand new blockchain meant to be more scalable. But even then, Nassim and I, when we were working on architecting and tech leading on the wallet infrastructure, we realized we had to build a number of off-chain optimizations and pieces of infrastructure that would ultimately scale to Facebook scale. No blockchain, even Libra, was going to be able to just full on take the user base. And what was interesting too, we took that and combined with the regulatory landscape. Obviously, at that point in time, we were working to get DM into the applications at Facebook. Though at the time, we also explored other options of what would it take to pursue alternate paths of maybe another currency, whether it's another digital asset or fiat only. And essentially, we're tasked with looking at a build versus buy decision in the company. And from scoping with other tech leads, we had built a lot very specific to that infrastructure of DM and Libra, because we wanted to really leverage and deeply leverage all of the great things that the blockchain brought to life that were brand new. But it also meant that to go support another blockchain was going to take quite a lot of work. And so quickly the conversation transitioned to what does it take to either buy or partner. And at that point in time, we realized that it was very clear that the wallet piece and creating keys was one piece. But in order to integrate at this scale and for a user experience that Facebook users understand. They don't want to necessarily understand gas fees or how account addresses work, right? We want to make it invisible and truly feel like Web 2, feel like it's still part of Facebook. We realized that we would have to either cobble together a bunch of solutions and still build a bunch, or go back to building and maybe go with one partner. And it was very clear that there was this gap that if other product companies wanted to build in the space, they'd be faced with a similar challenge. And so once we moved to Andreessen Horowitz or helping advise the portfolio and partners, this came up over and over again and really validated our thesis that there was more in the market that was needed beyond just a wallet. And so at Bastion, we really think about building a platform and building multiple pieces in that platform to complement each other, to complement building products. And so maybe I'll hand off to Nas, and we really think about it today as three components, over time more, but really more than just a single point of key management or wallet management, and really how do we integrate with products and builders to enable the best user experience.
Yeah. So essentially the way we kind of like thought about the platform, as Riyaz mentioned, is kind of this entry point needs to be safe. It needs to pretty much be invisible, right? Like a lot of people are talking about seamless onboarding to Web3, let's onboard everyone. The way we conceptualize this is the best onboarding is no onboarding at all. That's kind of like, that's the bar. Let's just kind of like make it so that people wake up 3 years from now and realize like, wait, everything, 2 years, 1 year, whatever the case might be, realize down the road, wait, actually everything that I own is on a blockchain. I can actually move it outside of the ecosystem. I can actually do more once I kind of graduate from a knowledge standpoint. And I think that this approach of a user journey that starts with not knowing anything and allowing people to gradually, graduate from that is important. So we went on at the foundation essentially with custodial wallets, really accessible in a Web2 fashion. No need to people hated passwords. They're not going to like see phrases. So let's just kind of remove that entirely from the equation, allowing people to create wallets with simple Web2 methods, essentially to authenticate, whether that's a Google account and so on. And key recovery would look like account recovery of your Gmail account. That's it. That's where we start, really, to make sure that billions of people get onboarded without them knowing, really, and that's the type of conversation that we're having on a daily basis. And then make sure that it is compliant and safe for users, right? And once we have that in place, that is not the end. That's just the beginning. And we essentially leverage the custodial piece to do two things on top of it. The first one is what we call a smart transaction routing system. And the idea there is really enabling a way for businesses to not have all the user interactions go on chain and be impacted essentially for the cost of interoperability. So we fundamentally believe that it's not everyone gets a wallet and everything goes on chain all the time. There's a time and place. We see blockchains as very efficient rails for reaching people that are outside of a platform, right? Like TikTok works great. Counter-Strike works great. Like, let's not impact everyone essentially that is using the product on a daily basis for the sake of the people who want to go off platform and to interact, who want to have like a broader reach, either outbound or inbound. So we essentially build this smart transaction routing as a piece of infrastructure that understands which state needs to be posted and executed on chain for everyone to see, or is there a way essentially to route it internally? And that's not a new concept, right? Like central exchanges work exactly the same way. Logan, you and I being both at Coinbase, if you send me tokens, it is only going to be executed internally. But if you send to Riyaz and Riyaz is outside on the chain and not on the Coinbase platform, obviously Coinbase will send through the chain. But the idea here is making that more general purpose and serve different types of interactions, different types of tokens, any, essentially experience or new form of kind of constructs that are being built on the blockchain really, at an incredibly fast pace. We want to make sure that we support those things. So that's essentially making the user experience as snappy as a Venmo, or Hulu or Netflix, essentially as much as possible, truly free of gas fees, not just kind of like sponsored, but actually truly free of gas fees. and no confirmation time involved essentially. And so that's kind of like a more pragmatic view on, including Web3, where if Web3 is here, but let's only use the blockchains whenever needed, because blockchains are kind of highways in a sense. And if you want to go see your neighbor, you probably don't want to use the highway every single time.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And I think maybe to step back a little bit before we kind of get into kind of the wallet infrastructure that you guys have built, or key management, and then smart transaction routing. And I think also you're going to do customer analytics, which I think today is extremely nascent on kind of blockchain technology. It's very hard to have something like Google Analytics, have really engineers get any feedback from any of their products. So looking forward to diving deep into that as well. But one thing that you mentioned, Riyaz, that kind of caught my eye is some of the limitations of the early blockchain architectures for kind of scaling to the masses. And I think truly, like, we all really want to get to the Facebook levels of scale. Billions of daily active users on blockchains. Can you kind of, going as deep as you guys did in kind of past jobs, running engineering organizations at scale, being involved with many of prominent companies in the industry, can you kind of talk about some of the limitations that you saw of other blockchain designs? I think I've done numerous kind of podcasts with all different architecture designs now, whether it's kind of Ethereum and the layer 2 landscape, kind of shrouding data compression with L2s, or like the high throughput architecture, even with Mist and Labs and Aptos, where they have high throughput at base layer doing data parallelization on the virtual machine. Can you kind of talk about just maybe like a variety of like the different architectures that you saw today, and even after kind of evaluating some of those situations, why Bastion is still required?
Great question. And really across the space, there's a lot of really great work being done. I think we're still in the early innings when it comes to scaling up blockchains. We're really excited about what's happening across the space. You have in SWI, whether it's improving the existing L1s, what we've seen with like dank sharding and other directions. L2s, of course. Now there's even L3s. So we expect and are excited for all the activity happening in the space. And at Bastion, we're not taking a side on one direction or area being more promising than another. Really, our goal is how do we make for product builders and the users of those products today have the experiences be snappy as if they were still on a TikTok or a Netflix or a Web2 app. And part of that on our side is to be a trusted partner and basic collaborator and bridge between, not in the bridge in the blockchain sense, but between the latest technologies and our APIs that we offer to customers, and behind the scenes doing what we need to do to leverage the best in class technologies, or whether it's behind the scenes, for example, doing things with account abstraction or doing, it's not scalability, but to your point, that's how we view our role at Bastion, is to stay up to date and on the latest for each of these chains and each of these different ecosystems, ways that we can deliver the best experience to our customers. And so to that end, I think it's exciting. I think there's a lot going on. I think we're still early to get to there's that metric, right, in web, like if you need to make things load in like less than so many milliseconds, and we need to get there with Web3, right, where you can go do something, whether it's a smart transaction, contract transaction, or like just sending payment, whatever it is. We need to get there. I think we will get there. And, and in the meantime, how do we, as Bastion, provide the best experience, even if it's not religiously on chain all the time, which I think for the next billion users, I think, maybe controversial to some people, but our take is they probably aren't going to care for a lot of the interactions, whether it's on chain or off chain. And there are ways for us as Bastion to help facilitate them, get them the best user experience, but still serve them when things do need to go on chain as well, whether it's to interact with a smart contract, to transfer, across different networks, and still be their partner there. So we really view it as being this trusted partner, staying up to date, and also where we can, helping optimize further on our platform.
And I honestly love that. And I fully agree that kind of the early preferences of the blockchain users today are not going to be the same preferences of what actually gets us to mainstream adoption. And unfortunately, I think what we all care about are the properties of decentralization and what those grant us, but not necessarily kind of the decentralization for decentralization's sake. And so I guess like what I'm trying to get at for Bastion, I understand and definitely appreciate kind of having the more Web 2 like capabilities, but from a technical perspective, how is that working under the hood?
Yeah. So essentially, the way we think about it, as Riyaz mentioned, we want to be an efficient routing system of any interaction, both from a time and a cost perspective, because this is what people, and actually businesses as well, will care about, really, enabling those things. And so the way it actually works behind the scenes is, you essentially have several components that have to work together. The first one is a router that that needs logic essentially to understand what state actually can be represented internally versus externally. This is, we're not going to come up with a perfect solution at first. So like this is definitely something that we're working directly with our customers, starting with some form of state and then kind of like increasing over time. Certainly didn't want to have something as massive as essentially a full-blown kind of like fork, off-chain. Really wanted to have a ledgering infrastructure that makes it easy for other things to get integrated. So, other form of accounting systems and kind of like treasury reviewing, a lot of the activity internally, because we've seen that at Facebook, right? Like a lot of the activity essentially happening between users of a business need to be reported. They need to be reconciled. And there are a lot of things essentially happening. There over time, NFTs or other kind of like goods that are being purchased are going to be considered like on the balance sheet and kind of like as inventory. Some of it is going to be returned. So there's going to be like all these things that need to exist because they do exist currently. And the systems in place, like it basically are not going to get adapted all of them essentially to the new technology. Is going to be for the new technology to adapt to a lot of what's existing. So we essentially have this routing system that has logic to understand what kind of state can be represented internally versus has to be posted externally. If it needs to be posted externally, it kind of like takes our current route. So we have, leverage, meta transactions essentially for gas sponsorship and, batching and in parallelization and so on, which obviously everyone knows and love from the account abstraction world. I think that this is definitely something that, even though we generally don't advertise it, really wanted to leverage because it is truly a plus for the user experience and kind of this guaranteed delivery of action is something that is kind of table stakes in the traditional tech world, right? And then whenever it needs to be executed internally, we basically have proprietary kind of ledger infrastructure that is more general purpose. We've seen kind of like ledgering for fungible tokens, and obviously a lot of them, will be kind of double entry ledger systems and kind of like have the ability to put things on hold, to credit, to debit, and release funds and so on, and burn them and mint them. But we're going to need something a lot smarter than that, essentially, for these new type of assets for, real world, for example, real world asset and tokenization, have maturity and kind of like a bunch of other kind of like properties associated to them. And so we're going to want to make sure that our system can represent as much as possible, so that our customers can use us as a source of truth for the vast majority of the the state that they have, and the chain to be essentially a settlement layer for it. And it was very interesting to kind of go through a lot of the work that was being done. Obviously worked with amazingly smart people from the DM, our DM days, who went on to build Misten Labs, who went to build Aptos, who went on to build Linora. And the idea there is that a lot of work is being done at the consensus layer, essentially, and state management to really ensure that as little kind of like the atomic kind of like actions that need to happen together take as little space as possible, essentially, and as little time as possible. But you're always going to end up with actions that need to be validated by a certain amount of entities that don't optimize really to be very close to each other, to be part of the same data center, etc. Right? Like you worked at this, you understand kind of building massive scale infrastructure is already hard enough when the information is flowing inside the same data center from like one machine to the one that is like right next to it. And so adding kind of like a consensus, a global consensus layer on top of it is going to be very hard. And so we're trying to move as much of these things as possible so that let's try to get on platform interactions pushed as much as possible to off chain, and allow off platform interactions to go on chain, essentially.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, it's extremely hard to kind of have those real time with like very minimal latency. Having data centers, whether it's AWS or AWS East or AWS Europe, those actually make a real user difference in terms of latency, how quickly content's served. And it is, to your point, I think, in my prior life, we would optimize websites just to save a couple hundred milliseconds because the bounce rate would be much higher if the latency was slightly high. And so I definitely sympathize with all those points. I think from maybe the more technical minds that are in the space, just understanding, are you guys so kind of collecting these single transactions in kind of like, not in AWS, but in different more high-powered infrastructure around the world to have lower latency, and then through that smart routing can optimize whether the transaction goes on one blockchain or another if it needs to ultimately be settled to kind of have global consensus.
Exactly. That's essentially the idea. For example, let's take a very simple example. I send you an NFT, you send it to Riyaz, say that all of us three are in Bastion. There is no need for the blockchain to know about all of these intermediary transactions, unless Logan, as an intermediary, wants to prove essentially ownership of the NFT kind of independently to a third party or a backend or whatever the case might be. And so our system is really built for this, just understanding if this is essentially interactions that do not have side kind of like a additional state that is generally noted as critical to be represented on chain. Let's try to avoid that. And sometimes we actually, and part of our infrastructure is this ledgering system to understand who owns what and what is the state of different assets within our infrastructure. And some of it is essentially orchestration of wallets and orchestration of transactions, because obviously now you have sometimes, for example, say that like you have an NFT and it's in your wallet, you send it to someone else, and this other person wants to unlock a token and get it experience. The token getting experience is not going to generate any on-chain transaction, right? It's just going to be an off-chain message that is being signed, whether that's EIP 712 or personal sign, whatever the case might be. And so the idea here is that now these actions can trigger the lazy movement of assets. They can trigger the lazy, publishing of state to the chain. And so that's kind of like that's where a lot of the dark magic happens, essentially, just understanding which state needs to be represented at which point on chain. And sometimes interactions that would not cause movements on chain will actually, and sometimes they won't just appear. And so we've been seeing a lot of cases, especially in the gaming space and social, where a lot of these interactions can be routed internally and can actually save between 70 and 90% of the cost, essentially, to user. So
perfect. Well, so maybe to summarize, I mean, ultimately with Bastion, just on the high level architecture, you guys, from your previous engineering experience building these systems at scale, have really optimized and learned to appreciate latency is very important. Whether you're in California or New York or in Europe, in Japan, it really matters how close you are to the actual servers to serve that real-time information. And ultimately what Bastion is trying to create is kind of that more co-located high-performance computing, where then if transactions ultimately need to settle and have global consensus, those can be pushed to the blockchain, achieving kind of the properties of Web3 that we all kind of know and appreciate, while still having the very low transactions or very low latency, kind of from a geographic standpoint.
Yeah, even cost to a certain extent. I think that we've been talking to a lot of companies that essentially were forecasting, millions of dollars of gas fees essentially spent even on Polygon and other, fairly efficient chains. And the problem is that it doesn't work essentially for, the early stages in general of Web3 products. They want to take it more gradually from a, cost, operational cost standpoint. And so we were there essentially working with them on optimizing the cost as well as the latency for the user experience, and both kind of like cost, decreasing by 70 to 90%, and in 70 to 90% of the cases having these instant interactions rather than waiting, 4+ seconds for finalization and confirmation of the transactions.
Awesome. And so maybe last question, and then we can move on to kind of deep dive like the core functionality of what you guys are ultimately building with the smart wallet, the smart routing, and then also ultimately the customer analytics. If an engineer approaches you guys today and says, look, I really appreciate what Bastion's doing, I really want this for my customers, are they building locally in Bastion? So like obviously Ethereum has like the EVM, Misten Labs has Move, Solana has Rust. Are they building in kind of that Bastion native language, or is there a specific programming language? Can people port their applications over to Bastion? How's that process ultimately work?
Good question. So we have APIs that our customers can integrate with over REST. We're working on SDKs and other ways to better integrate, but not a specific language or ecosystem. Trying to make it as simple and generic as possible, just to feed in and integrate seamlessly into existing product flows today.
Perfect.
Yeah. We will probably have at some point like some programmability to this layer to allow kind of like more self-served logic for our customers. But right now, all of the use cases that we see and the struggle of our customers tend to fall in very simple interactions, whether that's a mint, a burn, a transfer, kind of like locking, unlocking, all these things, but really fall into like very specific set of actions that are actually not too hard to represent and really onboard our customers to.
And for the kind of crypto native crowd, for them to kind of conceptualize this in their head, because it is a little bit more technical, all of crypto is technical, so it's hard for the normie crowd to kind of follow along, but I think in general now people kind of understand bridges, they understand layer 1s, layer 2s, and kind of starting to understand the layer 3s. I'm not sure, how would you guys kind of classify yourself in those buckets, or would you describe yourself as something else?
I think we try to name it for now, naming it a Web3 orchestrator. I think that this is probably kind of like the most accurate naming for it, in the sense that we actually do orchestrate transactions on and off chain. We're trying to get ahead of something that you mentioned, which is wallets essentially being multi-chain, kind of like you having the same address, kind of like stable address across multiple chain, most likely EVM, whenever, because obviously you need to have also a deterministic address creation scheme as well. But, we're trying to get ahead of a world where companies will essentially choose whichever blockchain is the cheapest and the fastest at that point in time, right? Like another one might be bloated with a Nike drop or, some kind of massive event that is happening. Hopefully that doesn't impact our, not as much, and we get to internet performances, but that will be essentially a solution, right? Like we will want to live in a world where companies get to choose which one is the cheapest one and be fairly agnostic, essentially to the actual chain. And we build towards this as well. So I would say kind of like orchestration across chain, on chain and off chain, orchestration of wallets. Your wallet doesn't need to be sending things to the chain every single time. We may post different transactions that the actual, action that you requested, so long as we execute the intent on chain or off chain. So that's really, I would say, Web3 orchestration.
And do you feel like ultimately, I love that vision, by the way. Do you feel like the end state is kind of this kind of more agnostic orchestration layer where transactions get routed to the cheapest blockchain that has the cheapest fees and lowest congestion, and it's kind of like a technical terms, a load balancer?
Good question. I think cheapest is one angle. The other angle we discussed earlier, right, is scalability in different, whether it's like throughput or latency, depending on the application, right? Whether it's a game application versus a social media application, you can have different profiles and different wants and needs. And so really our role as the orchestrator is to understand on these different axes how to best route and how to best manage these flows to enable the best products for our customers. So yes, so your question, yes, but also other axes as well.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, fully aligned. Well, just in the interest of time, I appreciate kind of the more depth and clarity on just the general Bastion architecture. But I would say, as much as I personally love the architecture designs, users don't really care about it. So let's talk about what it ultimately enables. So as you guys were kind of mentioning in the beginning, really one of the key and hardest parts about blockchain adoption, I think, is just really starting with that wallet infrastructure. We've all gone through kind of that 12 key mnemonic phrase where we go through and be like, all right, this is your ledger, don't lose it. And if you lose these keys, well, you're shit out of luck. Can you talk about a little bit more in depth how you are going to try to make that wallet and onboarding experience easier so even we can kind of eventually, hopefully, get our grandparents to use the blockchain technology?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the grandparents analogy because we think about it the same way. In that, what's the grandparents test or grandma test to make it just super seamless? And to go back to what something Nass said at the beginning, we were just starting. Really, we view onboarding it's critical, and the best onboarding is no onboarding at all. So our vision really is you're already a customer of some company and have the app. One day you open the app and there might be a new tab, and there happens to be a digital asset, whether it's an NFT or something else, or however and it's up to, again, fully white label. So as our customer, it's really up to them to decide how they want to message and really build it into their existing experience. We don't want customers to feel like there's like a ratchet on, like you have to have this extra extension or this extra thing to see Web3. It should just be native and as if it was like already there and you stumbled upon it. And maybe it's a wallet, maybe you don't. It's up to them. And so we view it as, by way of being custodial and having APIs, we can enable, essentially this invisible onboarding. And then you have this wallet that may have assets in it. It may interact in ways, whether it's for, loyalty programs, automated flows, subscriptions, being able to simplify product flows across and not having to click a bajillion different times because we have API driven flows, making it just super invisible and seamless is the goal.
Yeah, really kind of like, at the end of the day, we really fundamentally believe that, we're on a computer, we're talking to each other. Our computer is doing and browser is doing a tremendous amount of action on our behalf, right? And our intent was just having this meeting and being able to communicate to each other. And obviously, we're not essentially sending bit by bit kind of like approval. We're not sending word by word approval. This is this kind of like ongoing streaming. And we really fundamentally believe that Web3 should have more zero-click experiences, right? You signed in, you basically gave some approval essentially for some period of time to do a set of action or join a room, whatever the case might be, open a conversation. But zero-click interactions are part of our daily basis. And Web3 is not going to get a special treatment, right? It is going to be held to the same bar, probably even worse because of the bias of many things that like we've seen and read in the space. But obviously, it's on us to get the bar to Web3. Essentially, the bar for adoption of products is TikTok, is Venmo. This is who we're competing against, essentially, in terms of user adoption. So we need to get at least better than them, and oftentimes better. So that's kind of like how we think about not just the user adoption, this kind of like initial activation of the user, but we've actually seen a big problem in the space when talking to a lot of portfolio companies at A16z and outside of the portfolio, is that, great, you get a wallet, you can connect it with, you get a wallet to say, a Google account, right? Like you just have like a single click onboarding. That's great. That's probably actually better than, I don't remember how I created my TikTok account, but probably had like more information to fill for TikTok than getting a wallet. But the problem is the ongoing experience, right? Like you have this initial activation, people mint an NFT and they just don't do anything, and there's churn and very low user retention, right? And that's a problem. That's probably the biggest problem, because the vast majority of the internet experiences that we all have collectively are not about our onboarding. It's about our ongoing experiences of using them and ensuring that there is zero friction, that there is quality, that there is a tremendous amount of value that we get from it. And so Bastion was not just here to solve this onboarding problem, but really focused on this end-to-end experience that is kind of like an ongoing basis, wanting to make sure that we're on par with Web 2 and can actually compete when it comes to user experiences.
Yeah, I am, again, fully aligned with that. I mean, kind of even looking back to my time at Tesla, Elon was religious about kind of removing anything that was not necessary. He said really like kind of the best design is like really how many things you can eliminate from the total architecture, and was kind of relentless about removing things that were not necessary. And I think to each of your points, blockchain, as much as we love it, there's a lot of early adopters. There is a lot of friction, and it's kind of hard to abstract a lot of that, even with the current technology designs. And I think to really push it forward, that has to be abstracted. And honestly, going to your point, giving developers kind of the flexibility that they're more accustomed to with more robust APIs. We really are still at the starting line. And I think even in global terms, adoptions, I mean, in my mind, all the blockchains are really kind of on equal footing, just because there's not one single application that has like 10 million daily active users. It is really small.
It really is. It really is. And I think that things will start to change when the entire kind of like blockchain aspect is removed from it, because then we kind of leverage the user kind of the user network effects, right? Like the more users, the more use cases we can unlock. Obviously, performance is very hard to tackle, and it's kind of, blockchain has great user network effects, right? But very bad performance network effects. And so the more users, the worse the performances are, and it goes very quickly. We've seen that with NFT drops, and even I think that a lot of very smart people are working extremely hard to improve performances by orders of magnitude, 1 or 2, right? The problem is that the internet operates at many orders of magnitude higher in terms of performance than blockchains, even post optimizations. And so obviously we're going to keep improving. This is a very new technology, and people, the brightest people, I feel like, are on it. The smart people working on databases, and for example, the DM team, and now like a lot of them at Bastion and Aptos, who were building essentially large scale database infrastructure at Facebook and Facebook scale, are now working on this very problem. But we're still going to be limited. We're still going to be much slower than centralized databases. It doesn't mean that we should not leverage the blockchain at all. It still provides us identity of the people. And sometimes they're a great rail for the execution of this interaction. And sometimes we just want to leverage the identity of the users to execute this action off-chain, which is literally what happens when we unlock a token-gated experience, right? Like the blockchain still allows us to bootstrap trust with someone else. So that's kind of like how we think about it, and really believe that once we start putting people in a place where they don't need to know what goes on chain and what doesn't, even if they know that they have a wallet, probably won't know. Just like, the vast majority of people probably don't know whenever there is airdrop and they're airdropping something to someone else. They don't know if it's, probably people just don't know if it's Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, you name it. They just know that the file is being transferred very quickly, and that's great, right? If there is an email, they don't know about IMAP, POP3, and so on. They just know that it's being essentially delivered and quickly. And essentially, that's the goal.
And maybe on the topic of scalability and kind of ultimately leading into the smart transaction routing, Riyaz, just at your time, I mean, obviously focusing deep on like the core technical architectures of all these blockchains, what do you feel like is the biggest limitation? Is it the virtual machines, how they're designed? Is it how they do the data dissemination? Is it consensus? Is it ultimately the storage problem? What do you feel like from your research has been like the biggest unearthings kind of across the board that is really limiting blockchain adoption in terms of scalability from the technical point of view?
It's a good question. I think different teams and even within ecosystems are tackling from multiple different angles all at once. And so to be fully honest, I mean, I think it's still early and we're still figuring out exactly what, from different angles, what gains we can get. I think the holy grail is thinking about it just from the user perspective. And then how do we get from a user perspective down to website type response times and with like interactive times. And so I'm optimistic. As Nas mentioned, I think the smartest people are working on this from multiple angles, whether it's, at the consensus layer or whether it's at the storage layer or just thinking through just different ways to model data that is on chain and what has to go on chain and what can be linked on chain and not necessarily on chain. So I think it's still a broad problem. I think it's still, and we're seeing like Ethereum, right, has been doing just like gradual increases and kind of has the roadmap set. So I think it's interesting. I think with us at Bastion, we're going to a place in the goal in the future as an orchestrator is that understanding these different nuances and our customers' use cases of, it's a game, it's a network for social media, it's this brand experience that corresponds to its entertainment, like brand. Understanding our customers and their use cases and their goals will be in a place to help guide them as well on like where, what to consider, or also, and honestly, the goal would be to do that invisibly to them. Like they know that they're with Bastion, they onboard, we handle all that complexity for them, and end result is their users not only onboard but don't churn, and we can really get to that daily active user, monthly active user count, have the activity, and in a way that has amazing product experiences. And so that's really what we think about every day at Bastion, both for today and long term, and how we think about just what our goals are.
Yeah. And I personally love the product point of view. I truly believe the early kind of pioneers in the space got a 0 to 1 on the technical base architecture, kind of with the invention of Bitcoin, then Ethereum kind of expanding upon that with smart contracts. And now we've kind of gotten to at least a point where we can develop distributed applications, but now I think really to take it to the next level, focusing on that application side and being ruthless about the pragmatism on what does it really take for kind of the Web 2 normal experience that the hundreds of millions and billions of people are ultimately accustomed to, and bringing that kind of mindset and product ideology to Web 3. And I think Bastion's kind of hit the nail on the head there. And so talking about the smart routing system just in a little bit more depth. So transactions ultimately are living on Bastion and then get routed to these individual blockchains. Can you talk a little bit more in depth, like how that process is happening? Is it truly kind of just, can users like specify, like they want transactions going one way to one blockchain or another? Is that kind of all completely handled back of the house with Bastion? Yep.
Good question. Today, it's more of like a white glove experience. We do work like closely with our customers in understanding their flows and their chains. We're growing chain support across Bastion. And so over time, that will become more and more automated, will become, more and more supported. We're really starting to focus on deep integration with blockchain as opposed to supporting all of them all at once, but in a shallow way. And really that's part of for the product builders and the experience. When we do go on chain, we're able to leverage the best in class, like, the real features of the chain in a way that's meaningful, whether it's interacting with smart contracts, whether it's, going into like batching transactions, other interactions. We want to make sure that when we support a blockchain, we really, truly, deeply support it. So that's where we're starting. We're going toward this more automated flow of understanding which chain is best for what and being that guide in the flow. And yeah, I think for our customers, really integrating with the API, being able to, with Bastion, initiate the flows and then us behind the scenes taking care of it. And that's where on the smart transaction router, that's where the smarts comes from, understanding should this be on chain? Because we know for sure it's like we have to interact with smart contract. We have to post state. Is there an opportunity to go off chain for whatever reason? Whether it's like user within Bastion, some like kind of initial transaction precondition that we can first execute before doing something later on chain that's batched, and understanding all of these edge cases and really deeply, and like again going back deeply supporting the blockchain. It'll depend per chain. It'll depend on how we support the smart contracts and the smart contract itself, and that's where all the complexity lies. And there's no crisp answer there to like kind of give you the TLDR, but essentially that's where all the smarts are of understanding what exactly can go where and how on our systems, even like preemptively, can we like prepare whether it's like extra wallets or extra like other pieces of in on our side, so that when it is time to go on chain, we have everything set up to quickly do so in a way that still feels snappy for the user.
And all totally makes sense. And I appreciate kind of the pragmatic naming convention of smart. Maybe back to you, Nash. I think one thing that we have really limited ourselves in today has been those customer analytics. I mean, it's kind of like flying a plane blind in terms of traditional Web 2 standards. You have no analytics on like button clicks or where people are. It's very hard to actually iterate for these Web3 product founders. And that's something that's kind of Bastion is natively providing from the beginning, is kind of these deeper customer analytics. Can you touch upon why it's kind of taken so long for customer analytics to kind of come into the Web3 world and how you guys are approaching it?
Yeah, we have a very strong opinion on this. It's very interesting. So, if you think about how a lot of very successful businesses have been built in Web2, many of them essentially created a large asymmetry of information and access on their users compared to the rest of the world. If you want to get some information about Logan as a Facebook user, or like access them and just sell them something, you have to build on top of Facebook, not next to them. And so it's interesting because a lot of the Web3 crowd goes to these companies and basically says, just stop doing everything that made you successful in the first place. Do the opposite. Just give full freedom to your users. And yeah, that's it. And the problem here is that it doesn't work because they can't reduce their asymmetry of information that they've been building for so long without anything in exchange. They need something in exchange. And I think that the value here is, and the way we think about it is that kind of like cookies, browser cookies and kind of like retargeting kind of like cookies that really get you the information as, whether you're on an application on, iOS, or whether you're a website, you're starting to get less and less information about the user activity outside once they leave your platform, right? And that's kind of the death of kind of browser cookies is happening. And the idea here is that wallets are essentially the perfect way for a lot of these companies to still remain in the flow of the touch points of their users once they leave the platform. And so if you think about it that way, custodial wallets essentially become, or wallets in general, but like specifically custodial wallets become a super robust solution for the cookie problem. And really, we believe that it's one of the most overlooked opportunities, honestly, for brands to build this holistic view of who their users are once they leave the platform. If I go on Nike.com today and I purchase something, Visa is going to know about it, right? Nike is going to know about it. But if the same person goes on another secret marketplace, or goes to like an event and want to unlock something else by proving that they own this shoe, for example, and use the same payment method, Visa is going to know about it as well. Nike is not, right? And so the idea is for brands like Nike and a bunch of other companies that have visibility into this primary kind of like touch point, but nothing after, is critical for them essentially to bridge the gap on. And so we see really wallets as the way for brands to build holistic view of who their users are outside of their platform. So with that in mind, we started right away thinking analytics are essentially this kind of like treasure trove for companies in Web3. Users get more empowerment, they get more essentially reach to their user experiences and more ownership over their assets. And businesses in exchange who issue those wallets basically get the information about the user whenever they go off platform. So I think that a lot of people, in this space, I think that decentralization and self-sovereignty tends to come with, privacy kind of mindset, kind of privacy-centric mindset, which is great. I'm very privacy-minded myself. But there needs to be some incentive for businesses to support these interactions of platform. And so that's essentially what we're trying to provide with Bastion. More access, broader reach to users and product builders, and in exchange, better data, better insights on who the end users are, to marketing teams essentially and product teams as well to improve their product over time.
Yeah, one thing I'll add to there too is it's not just the on-chain data, but also the off-chain data. And so, for example, today unlocking a token-gated experience, you may sign a personal message or EIP 712, and that message doesn't necessarily have to go on chain, right? But businesses would like to understand the engagement of these experiences and the value of, is this, how is this product or this experience actually performing? Are there things that we can improve? Where is their churn? And to your point, Logan, earlier, it's like, don't want these products and businesses to be flying blind and not understand what's actually going on platform. Or on platform could also be this off-chain component. And we think over time, there'll be more and more off-chain to bridge in what you have in your wallets on-chain. And so, of course, at Bastion, that's a big point of emphasis for us as well.
Yeah, the wallet really will be kind of the central hub of Web3. And I think going back to kind of the original talking points of being able to onboard seamlessly, once you kind of remove that friction point and then even enable further kind of learnings for the developers and also the businesses of what people actually care about on chain, it really opens up a new world for, I would say, more dynamic applications, because that data set is much richer than it was prior. You've removed much of the friction points of the onboarding experience. And I think that really allows us to kind of go from the low millions of people that are actually doing things on chain to ultimately hundreds of millions in the future. And I think to the endpoint billions, where this technology that we've really kind of dedicated our lives to is in the hands of billions of people. I truly think that's kind of like the end goal.
Yeah. Really, it's so interesting. And to Riyaz's point, so much of it is really going to be driven by off-chain actions as well with the wallet. We're talking to massive universities. We're talking to massive brands that, especially on the loyalty side, right? You, Logan, for example, having, say, 200 Starbucks points visible on chain, that's great, amazing. The problem is first, the linking from the wallet to the individual, right? Ads, on-chain ads are probably just going to come and be a thing, but you still need to have some form of identity of, knowledge firsthand of who the user is to be able to retarget them in, on other applications. But more importantly, the businesses want to understand, what do you value enough to redeem those loyalty points for, right? And that is not going to be information that is going to be displayed on chain. What is it? Access to, is it ticket to an event? Is it a discount on a flight? Whatever the case might be, this is going to be what these companies are going to want to do retargeting on and kind of improve their marketing over. So I think that there is going to be a lot of wallets are going to be essentially this identity plus ownership provider. I think that there is no real concept of ownership provider right now. We all know about identity providers for, to a certain extent, but obviously the ownership provider is going to be a brand new category essentially, and is going to drive a lot of value back to the businesses who are taking a step forward in Web3 and really leveraging that as a way to discover their user behaviors once they leave the platform, once they purchase this initial product.
I do agree. It's kind of early innings, and I'm glad to see you guys kind of spearheading this effort. It's much needed, and I know lots of engineers are going to appreciate that data and the analytics that you guys can provide. Maybe as we're just kind of coming to the close of the podcast, what is just your general thoughts on the markets today? Each of you have kind of been in the industry for some time. Obviously, crypto is very prone to bull and bear markets, the over enthusiasm, and then deep, the industry is going to die. And it's kind of, there's never really an in between. How are you guys kind of approaching just the general market today and kind of user sentiment, or just even from the technology point of view, things that you're excited about?
For sure. Good question. And yeah, Nas and I have seen multiple crypto winters, and this is another one. And I think this time we're especially optimistic. It's in past winters, I'd often get the question, is Ethereum dead? Is Bitcoin dead? This time I haven't gotten that question. I think it's pretty clear to folks that crypto is here to stay. And we saw that especially at Andreessen Horowitz, just the caliber of founders still looking to start a company, teams building companies and growing companies, very, very amazing talent and just momentum. And then on the business side, I mean, you've seen Nike, you've seen Starbucks with a loyalty program. Nas and I have been talking to multiple companies, big and small, that are still building in Web3. I think what we'll see going forward will be just potentially, there may be some rebranding. I think there's certain words that may come out with different brands, right? Like NFT, we've heard other companies call virtual creations, digital assets. I think from a technology perspective, there still is very solid technology. There's more coming, right? There's all the scalability we talked about, even within even the more user facing, just additions and changes to various platforms like Ethereum with account abstraction, more happening with new L1s, L2s. So optimistic, and I think the way we view Bastion is we're building in this winter. We've done it before in past roles, building in winter. It's a great time to build. There still is businesses that are actively building now, where we're building with, and when more are ready to onboard, we're here for them, and we want to be that core infrastructure that enables them to build the best products.
Amazing. Yeah. And last question to both of you. Apologies, I want to respect your guys' time. I know you guys have a hard stop. Last question. In terms of, obviously, you spent each a good amount of time at Andreessen Horowitz. You got to be in the heart of the Bay Area, kind of the home of technology, and I ultimately got to talk with a lot of exciting founders in the space. Can you kind of just maybe depart as closing thoughts, just some of the biggest either lessons from internally or to founders in the space of tools for success, or biggest takeaways from kind of being inside that ecosystem?
Yeah, this is a great question, because something that started happening essentially this cycle and kind of this bear market that was not present in the past was that we're really seeing major companies, product leaders and product managers and product organizations essentially building in the space. Essentially, we're not talking anymore just to head of digital innovation and kind of people head of Web3. Those are obviously still present and really helping shepherd essentially innovation. But now a tremendous amount of product people are focused at these major companies to make the entire space move forward. And I think that this is a great opportunity for founders to probably focus a little bit less on the technology. Technology is great. Technology will enable these product experiences, but you're going to be talking to more and more product people. Talk about product, talk about user experience, talk about things that actually do matter to them, regardless of the technology, regardless of Web3, regardless of blockchains, because they're going to hold you to the same standard as any other vendor that they use, whether that's a MongoDB, whether that, anyone else, for that matter. So really, that's really something that is happening. This is a great shift. This is a great opportunity for us as an industry to show that we care about products more than technology.
Amazing. Well, gentlemen, Nash, Riyaz, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you for sharing what you're building with Bastion. Really appreciate you guys abstracting a lot of the complexities of the onboarding, really making it as seamless for kind of the Web 2 engineers to interact with blockchains and then ultimately provide that data analytics. I think that is a core missing piece that does not exist today. Creating Web 2-like experience with low latency is something that I think truly will push the industry forward. So again, thank you so much for coming on, and best of luck to what you're building at Bastion.
Thanks so much, and thanks for having us.